Good morning. Do women move on more easily after a breakup? I say no, not at all. But let's get into it. This video is inspired by a comment left on my video, Men and Feelings, which I will pin above. And thank you so much for your comment because you're inspiring an entire video. Frederick Anderson 597 says that there's a large biological difference between men and women that makes it easier for women to move on after a breakup, and that they're less loyal to their male partner. Now, Mr. Frederick Anderson, if you are watching this video, please provide evidence and research studies to substantiate this point of view, because you're stating it as if it's a fact. And I looked into this, and there is no such research that I was able to find, but I'm always interested in learning more. Let's continue. He says men generally have a harder time and often need longer to move on and are generally more loyal to their female partner. He says that this is based on biology because I'm just going to paraphrase, for most of human history, women have been dependent on a man for herself and her children for survival. And so if something happened to the man, she had to be able to quickly find a new man for her survival. So the loyalty to the man only existed as long as the man could provide for her. And so if he could no longer provide, she had to move on to someone else. So loyalty to her man is really vague and can quickly transition to loyalty to another man. If a woman is too strongly loyal and too emotionally tied to her man, it would delay a quick transition to a new man and provider when this becomes necessary. He says that traces of this biological instinct are still very much alive today. To which I said, I very much disagree, because when I got divorced, I was in deep emotional pain for 3 years. Whereas my ex-husband was only in pain for a year after and quickly remarried. And I've been single ever since. But let's continue. I told him I disagree, and he said, what is it that you disagree with? Are you questioning that women from the beginning of humanity have been completely dependent on a man for their survival, or that women have an easier and faster way to move on? What do you disagree with? I'm going to get into that in this video. He says that women still value and are attracted to successful men with money, but for men it's quite unimportant that women possess money. It is pathos that originates from the beginning of humanity, where women were completely dependent on a man for their survival. And therefore women have a tendency to keep the door open to other better proposals. Hence this constant posting on social media despite being in a relationship. I don't know any women in a relationship who are posting on social media looking for another man. So that's kind of sketchy. Guys, never date a woman who is posting her ass on social media. Never. This is strange. But anyway, it is a biological pathos that lingers and originates from the vital importance for their survival to be quickly able to find a new man to have a backup in the event that the man died or was injured. And he says we see that in mammals as well, because female lions, for example, have a vague loyalty to their male pack leader. If he dies, the loyalty is transferred to the new one until he can no longer provide. Well, let's just address this whole providing thing. I think that same thing happens to a man when the woman dies. I've known men where the wife died from cancer when the children were young, and the man immediately found a new wife as a replacement to have someone to care for the children and to take care of the house. So I think that makes sense, that people move on when they have to, and maybe they're in love with that new person, maybe not. But the quest for survival is very different from emotionally moving on. You know, if you just look at, for example, people who've broken up, how they handle it differently, I think a lot more has to do with their support system, what they're allowed to feel, and whether they were already checked out of the relationship. I think what commonly happens is that the woman, the one who is more inclined to want to feel an emotional fulfillment in the relationship and need that emotional tension and affection and support, if that isn't there, she's going to start maybe nagging or complaining, which is not so good, or making requests. I'd like to spend more time together. Let's go to therapy. And if the man keeps saying no because he isn't listening, she's left to suffer in her emotional pain. And after years and years of crying and suffering and being pushed away and neglected, she finally just has no more feelings for the guy. And that's what happened to me. And I asked a therapist, I'm like, I was so in love with my husband, and then one day I didn't want him anymore. Like, that was so weird to me. And she explained that it's like a frayed rug. You have a rug, and each time the man rejects you, dismisses you, ignores you, it frays a little bit, and after years and years, like water pouring over a stone that smooths the stone, right? You fray the rug and you fray the rug, and then it's that one last thing that breaks the last strand of the rug, and it's broken. And once it's broken and the woman is checked out, she's ready to move on. Because all those years she suffered and he didn't listen. This is why men need to have feelings and notice when they're not listening. And then she files for divorce, and now he is blindsided. But yet, will he go to therapy? No. And now he is devastated because while she was suffering, he was perfectly fine. He didn't notice her suffering because he didn't care, because the suffering was all about him. And he was fine the way it was. He didn't want to change and grow in love and grow in connection. And I'm just talking basic elemental connection. And now he's suffering. Now he's in pain. So it seems that she moved on faster, but really it's more about the timing. I did go ahead and do a little bit of research on this because this was my initial reply. First, I do want to say that when it comes to survival, people will move on. I mean, if my husband would have died when my kids were young, I would have tried to find a new man to help me raise my family. But that wouldn't mean that I moved on emotionally. It's about survival. And likewise, if I would have died while the kids were little, I would have hoped that my husband would find a new wife to help him raise the kids. I always had that in my heart. And in my own experience, it was being emotionally pushed away for 25 years that I finally had enough. But he didn't mind pushing me emotionally away because he didn't like closeness. But when I left, that's when he started crying. That's when he started not sleeping at night. That's when he was in great pain. So it might have looked like I moved on faster because I was fine when we divorced and he wasn't. But let's look at some of the research. because I don't want to just be making stuff up and just speaking from my own, experience. So I put this into Google, do women move on faster after a breakup? And the AI overview says no. In fact, the opposite is often true. Studies suggest that women may experience more intense initial pain, but they recover more fully. It's just that the women feel the intense emotional pain before they've left. So by the time they leave, they do recover more easily because they tend to have a better support system. They tend to work on their own emotional healing through support groups and therapy. And they feel more able to express their feelings so that they can process them quicker. Men often struggle with deeper, longer lasting effects because they're discouraged from having feelings. They're not as likely to go to therapy or seek any kind of support, and they're more likely to drown out their feelings by quickly moving on to a new relationship, which men often do, drinking a lot, or any other kind of distraction, so it can take them longer to heal. Because they don't want to deal with it. They don't want to deal with what happened. They don't want to look into why the relationship went bad. They are just pushing everything down and then moving on. I've met a number of men who quickly dated after divorce just to end up with some freaky, crazy woman who wasn't a good fit, but they were so afraid of being alone. And I think men are more afraid of being alone because they don't in general have as much of a support network. But, well, a lot of men do, but. So let's see. Factors that influence recovery speed is highly individual. So we can't say men versus women, it's individual. So let's talk about the factors that influence your recovery from a breakup. Processing your emotions, that's a big one. It says that women often process their emotions more externally by talking with friends, which can lead to a quicker but often more painful initial period of grief. Men may initially internalize their emotions more. That leads to a delayed but more prolonged struggle with heartache. Women have more support systems, such as friends and family, but men can too. So it just says the support system impacts the speed and effectiveness of moving on. The other one is attachment styles. Whether you have anxiety or avoidant tendencies, that may lead to a quick rebound relationship or delayed confrontation with emotions. And then, of course, individual differences. But what does moving on really mean? When this person says women quickly move on, he says they quickly attach to a new male. Historically, I don't know if there's any evidence he has for today, but there's a difference between moving on and recovering. A quick return to a new relationship can be a sign of avoidance or unhealthy coping mechanism rather than a true recovery, because a healthy person is going to have time to be alone after a relationship ends. In my opinion, you should be alone for 2 years to process everything and get your own footing again, to go from a we to a me before you make a new we, my opinion. True recovery involves processing the experience and developing a sense of emotional security after a breakup. Okay, so that was one, but I also found a study, and again, this person that was leaving the comment didn't give any studies, but I did find a study that said that women hurt more by breakups but recover more fully. This is in Science Daily, and I will put a link to the study in the description of my video. This is from August 9th, 2015. It's the only one I was able to find on a quick search. When I asked do women move on more easily after a breakup? It said no, women are more hurt. They experience more emotional pain following a breakup. And I think because women feel things more intensely. It says women also recover more fully. The way that they did the study is they asked 5,000 participants in 96 countries to rate the emotional and physical pain of a breakup on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being unbearable. And I would tell you I was at a 10 before I left him. They found that women tend to be more negatively affected by breakups. They reported higher levels of emotional pain and higher levels of physical pain. While breakups hit women the hardest emotionally and physically, women tend to recover more fully and come out emotionally stronger. Men, on the other hand, never fully recover. They simply move on. According to Craig Morris, research associate at Binghamton University and lead author on the study, the differences boil down to biology, which is the opposite of what the commenter was saying. He says biology makes women move on faster, but this study person said biology makes women endure more pain from a breakup. He says it's because they have more to lose by dating the wrong person. Women evolved to be more loyal, to invest more in a relationship. And I think women are more relationship oriented. That's why women are less likely to want to just hook up. They want to have sex with the man that they want the relationship with. It's an investment. And so women evolved to invest far more in a relationship because a brief romantic encounter could lead to 9 months of pregnancy, followed by many years of lactation for an ancestral woman, while the man may have left the scene literally minutes after the encounter. And that's the biology, that the woman has to be choosy biologically. She has to be choosy. And so she invests a lot more into this man, and she invests a lot more into the child. She has to. It is this risk of higher biological investment that, over evolutionary time, has made women choosier about selecting a high-quality mate. Hence, the loss of a relationship with a high-quality mate hurts more for a woman. Conversely, as men have evolved to compete for the romantic attention of women, the loss of a high quality for a mate may not hurt as much as first. The man will likely feel the loss deeply and for a long period of time as it sinks in that he has to start competing all over again to replace what he has lost, or worse still, come to the realization that the loss is irreplaceable. And that's what I hear men say a lot. They're like, I've heard men say, I am not that happy with my wife, but I don't want to divorce and start dating all over again. I hate dating. I don't want to go through this all over again. And so I think that men will tend to stay in unhappy relationships. But also, when men are socialized as children to not feel, when they're punished for crying and having feelings, when they're not allowed to show their anger, because anger is associated with violence rather than just finding your boundary, they're become dysfunctional in the relationship, leaving the woman deeply unhappy for years. And when her pain has finally broken her heart and she leaves, that's when he feels the pain. And that's when externally you might find, well, they got divorced and she's moving on. She's traveling, she's taking her yoga classes, she's exercising more, she's doing her therapy, she's living her best life, traveling with her friends, while he's just sad because what I've noticed is that when women get divorced, they will do all the things that they were repressed from being able to do while they were married because they sacrificed so much for that relationship and devoted so much for that relationship. I do think that in ancestral times, if the woman moved on, it was strictly for survival, as the man would have moved on too. Mr. Frederick Anderson didn't talk about what happens in ancestral times when the woman dies and the man is left with the child. The children, he's got to find a new wife, right? That's about survival and taking care of the children. I want to say one more thing about ancestral times. We hold this up as some kind of like perfection and we glamorize it, but it wasn't. We don't know how people felt. Like the guy saying, oh, men just spread their seed. They're supposed to have a harem of women. I don't think that those women liked being in a harem. I mean, look at the show Sister Wives, how much drama there is with just 3 or 4 women, and how little power the women had, and how they had to compete against each other so that Cody, the father, would pay attention to not only them, but to their children. Men competing for a woman makes a man a better man. He has to have the personal qualities to provide, to protect, and to be efficient in the world. But women competing for men just turns into jealousy, catty behavior, and loose sexuality. When women compete for men, they're on Instagram strutting their ass cheeks. Okay? That's not a good way for society to be. And so I'm not convinced that men or women suffer more. What I've seen in working with men, typically when they go through a breakup, they're very sad, and they tend to go through 3 or 6 months of a lot of drinking, a lot of eating. They stop going to the gym, they gain a bunch of weight, and after 3 or 6 months, they kind of snap out of it, and they're like, I'm going to cut back on the drinking, I'm going to start working out again. And often, because they're heartbroken, they will take a respite from dating because they just want to gain their footing again and have a break, because it does hurt them also. It hurts. I could say that there are people who are not hurt, who are maybe a bit more avoidant, or maybe they just married someone to use them and now they want to discard them like a narcissist. And so that can certainly happen. And there's certainly women and men like that too, who just move on easily because they never really know how to bond with someone. My own experience is that as a relationship-oriented person, my marriage meant everything to me. And the greatest pain I ever felt in my life were the last 3 years of my marriage. The pain was so intense for me that I didn't know how to get rid of this emotional pain. And I asked 2 therapists. And one just said, I know this is hard. And the other one just said, take some Valium. But really, I was thinking, I just want to be knocked out so I don't have to feel anything. I tried the Valium ones. That didn't help. It just made me feel in pain and drugged and unable to handle it and do anything with it. I didn't know what to do. I cried a lot. I relied on hope. I was at my wit's end, and I talked to my friends a lot. And then ultimately, after many years of that, something just changed inside of me where I just didn't want to be around anyone that hurt me so much and didn't care. And that's when his pain started. So I think it was hard for both of us. I wouldn't say that it was easy. I don't know anyone for whom divorce was easy. I thought it was just a good topic, and I don't like the kinds of comments where they're like, well, these women, these damn men, or these damn women. I don't think that's fair or realistic. And when I get these manosphere guys on my channel who are like, oh, these damn women, you know, I hide them from my channel because it comes from a very warped sense. I don't think that this is what this Frederick Anderson was saying, but I'm just saying there are these type of comments. It's not helpful. It's not helping us understand each other. I don't think it's realistic. And it just spreads negativity. It's what people say who've never been in a relationship. And I don't want those red pill guys angry at women or angry at men on my channel. I think that people can have had negative experiences with the opposite sex, but that doesn't mean that the opposite sex is bad. It just means that you just pick bad people. You gotta look at your picker. And sometimes the problem isn't you in the relationship, it's who you're picking. You have to look at who you're picking. And some people pick people who are avoidant or who neglect them or who hurt them. So that's all I want. In fact, it says on here that men are more likely to move on quickly after a long-term relationship to cope with loneliness, to fill a void, or to avoid emotional pain, often using new relationships as a form of self-preservation or a way to boost their ego. Sometimes they already emotionally disengaged from the relationship, or they were forced to end it. It may seem like men don't care, but it reflects different emotional processing, a fear of commitment, or a need to feel validated rather than a lack of love. Or they feel lonely and empty, so they're finding a woman to combat their fear of loneliness, of emptiness, and to avoid processing their emotions. So they want to suppress their emotions rather than deal with them. They want to boost their wounded ego and prove their worth, especially if they feel left behind or abandoned. Now, getting back to the women, what I said before, if a person had unmet needs or was unhappy for a long time, they were starting to emotionally detach and start to already feel like they were over the relationship before it even ended. And then some people may emotionally detach faster as a way to protect themselves from the pain of the breakup. So, moving on quickly doesn't always mean they didn't love their ex. It can signify different ways of loving, coping with pain or unfulfilled needs. But rushing into a new relationship to manage difficult emotions is often an unhealthy coping mechanism that prevents true healing and self-reflection. And in my own case, I did a lot of self-reflection and healing. I had to. I was angry with him for many, many years. I kept trying to figure out how to avoid it, how to get over it, you know, whereas he to this day says he doesn't want to talk about it. So that's just one example. I'm not saying that all men never want to talk about it, but that's my experience, is that I was married to someone who didn't want to process things or talk about things. And to me, when I asked him a couple years ago, if you were angry with me, just tell me why. You have an open floor. Just tell me why. I asked him several times, by email, by text, and in a phone call. And each time he's like, honey, I've moved on. And that's what he would always say. And that's, you know, just one anecdote of how a man seems like he moved on quickly because he never dealt with anything. So that's the end of my video. I will be back for the comments. And thank you so much for watching. And now I do have to go.